Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting edition of Know Your Legends here on kzomradio. I am Matt Jarbo, your host. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2012, and I thought we'd kick it off this year with a little bit different of a style of information on this podcast. The last series we did was Know Your Cryptids, which was awesome, got a lot of love. I thank you guys so much for listening, especially on Stitcher. You guys rock. And all you guys on Twitter and Facebook, too. I love you guys so much. Thank you. This time, we're going to be talking about unsolved murders. So, because I want to lead into the serial killer aspect. I'm very, interested in the serial killer world. And so I have a whole series lined up for that. But I wanted to kind of start with the first ones, with the basics, and everything like that. So I wanted to start off with talking about probably the most famous unsolved murder case that we all know, Jack the Ripper. This is a huge, crazy case that goes on for a long time with absolutely, no real suspect and no real clues. I mean, it's kind of like I don't want to say the first serial killer, but he's definitely probably the most famous worldwide in the sense of not being caught. So this entire podcast, this episode, is dedicated to talking about all the background information that you may not know about Jack the Ripper, or keeping you up to date on where things have gone and what have happened. So without further ado, let's get ready, and we're going to be talking about Jack the Ripper right now. Background. In the mid-19th century, England experienced an influx of Irish immigrants who swelled the populations of England's major cities, including the East End of London. From 1882, Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe and Tarsus, Russia, moved to the same area. The civil parish of Whitechapel in London's East End became increasingly overcrowded, work and housing conditions worsened, and a significant economic underclass developed. Robbery, violence, and alcohol dependency were commonplace, and the endemic poverty drove many women to prostitution. In October 1888, London's Metropolitan Police Service estimated there were 1,200 prostitutes and about 60 brothels in Whitechapel. The economic problems were accompanied by a steady rise in social tensions. Between 1886 and 1889, frequent demonstrations, such as that as the 13th of November, 1887, led to police intervention and further unrest. Racism, crime, and social disturbance and real deprivation fed public perceptions that Whitechapel was a notorious den of immorality. In 1888, such perceptions were strengthened when a series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. The murders. A large number of attacks against women in the East End during the era adds uncertainty to how many victims were killed by the same person. 11 separate murders stretching from April 3, 1888 to February 13, 1891, were included in London Metropolitan Police Service investigation, and were known collectively in the police docket as the Whitechapel murders. Opinions vary as to whether these murders should be linked to the same culprit or not, but 5 of the 11 Whitechapel murders, known as the Canonical Five, are widely believed to be the work of the Ripper. Most experts point to a deep throat slashes, abdominal and genital area mutilation, removal of internal organs, and progressive facial mutilations as the distinctive features of Jack the Ripper's modus operandi. The first 2 cases in the Whitechapel murder files, those of Emma Elizabeth Smith and Martha Tabram, are not included in the Canonical Five. Smith was robbed and sexually assaulted on Osborne Street in Whitechapel on April 3, 1888. A blunt object was inserted into her vagina, and she died the following day at a London hospital. She said that she'd been attacked by 2 or 3 men, one of whom was a teenager. The attack was linked to later murders by the press, but most authors conclude that it was gang violence unrelated to the Ripper case. Tabram was killed on August 7, 1888. She suffered 39 stab wounds. The savagery of the murder, the lack of obvious motive, and the closeness of the location and date to those of later Ripper murders led police to think that they were connected. However, the attack differs from the canonical murders that Tabram was stabbed rather than slashed at the throat and abdomen. Many experts today do not connect it with later murders because of the difference in the wound pattern. The Canonical Five. The Canonical Five Ripper victims are Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Nichols' body was discovered at 3:40 a.m. on Friday, August 31st, 1888, in Bucks Row in Whitechapel. The throat was severed deeply by 2 cuts, and the lower part of the abdomen was partially ripped open by deep, jagged wounds. Several other incisions on the abdomen were caused by the same knife. Chapman's body was discovered at 6 a.m. on Saturday, September 8, 1888, near a doorway in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. As in the case of Mary Ann Nichols, the throat was severed by 2 cuts, the abdomen was slashed entirely open, and it was later discovered that the uterus had been removed. At the inquest, one witness described seeing Chapman at about 5:30 a.m. with a dark-haired man of shabby, genteel appearance. Stride and Eddowes were killed in the early morning of Sunday, September 30th, 1888. Stride's body was discovered at 1 a.m. in Dupfield's yard off of Burner Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was one clear-cut incision which severed the main artery, the left side of the neck. Uncertainty about whether Stride's murder should be attributed to the Ripper or whether she was interrupted during the attack stems from the absence of mutilations to the abdomen. Witnesses who thought they saw Stride with a man earlier in the night gave differing descriptions. Some said her companion was fair, others dark, some said he was shabbily dressed, others said he was well dressed. Eddowes' body was found in Meter Square in the City of London 3/4 of an hour after Stride's. The throat was severed and the abdomen was ripped open by a long, deep, jagged wound. The left kidney in the major part of the uterus had been removed. A local man, Joseph Land, passed through the square with 2 friends shortly before the murder, and he described seeing a fair-haired man of shabby appearance with a woman who may have been Eddowes. His companions, however, were unable to confirm his description. Eddowes and Stride's murders were later called the double event. Part of Eddowes' bloody apron was found at the entrance to a tenement in Golston Street, Whitechapel. Some writing on the wall above the apron piece, which became known as the Golston Street graffito, seemed to implicate Jew or Jews, but it was unclear whether the graffito was written by the murderer as he dropped the apron piece or merely incidental. Police Commissioner Charles Warren feared the graffito might spark anti-Semitic riots and ordered it washed away before dawn. Kelly's gruesomely mutilated body was discovered lying in bed of a single room where she lived at 13 Miller Court off Dorset Street in Spitalfields at 10:45 a.m. on Friday, November 9, 1888. The throat had been severed down to the spine and the abdomen virtually emptied of its organs. The heart was missing. The canonical 5 murders were perpetrated at night on or close to a weekend and either at the end of a month or a week or so after. The mutilations became increasingly severe as the series of murders proceeded, except for that of Stride, whose attackers may have been interrupted. Nichols was not missing any organs, and Chapman's uterus was taken. Eddowes had her uterus and kidney removed and her face mutilated. Kelly's body was eviscerated and her face hacked away, though only her heart was missing from the crime scene. Historically, the belief that these 5 crimes were committed by the same man derives from contemporary documents that link them together to the exclusion of others. In 1894, Sir Melville Magnaton, Assistant Chief Constable to the Metropolitan Police Service and head of the Criminal Investigation Division, wrote a report that stated the Whitechapel murderers had 5 victims and 5 victims only. Similarly, the canonical 5 victims were linked together in a letter written by police surgeon Thomas Bond to Robert Anderson, head of the London CID, on November 10, 1888. Some researchers have thought that while some of the murders were undoubtedly the work of a single killer, an unknown larger number of killers acting independently were responsible for the others. Authors Stuart P. Evans and Donald Rumbelow argue that the canonical 5 is a Ripper myth and that while 3 cases, Nichols, Chapman, and Eddowes, can be definitely linked, there is less certainty over Stride and Kelly and less again over Tambram. Conversely, others suppose that the 6 murders between Tambram and Kelly were the work of a single killer. Dr. Percy Clark, assistant to the examining pathologist George Baxter Phillips, linked only 3 of the murders and thought the others were perpetrated by weak-minded individuals induced to emulate the crime. Magnaton did not join the police force until the year after the murders, and his memorandum contains serious factual errors about possible suspects. Investigation. The surviving police files on the Whitechapel murders allow for a detailed view of the investigative procedure in the Victorian era. A large team of policemen conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Whitechapel. Forensic material was collected and examined. Suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from the inquiry. Police work follows the same pattern today. Over 2,000 people were interviewed, upwards of 300 people were investigated, and 80 people were detained. An investigation was initially conducted by the Metropolitan Police Whitechapel Division of the Criminal Investigative Department, headed by Detective Inspector Edmund Reed. After the murder of Nichols, Detective Inspectors Frederick Alberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews were sent from central office at Scotland Yard to assist. After the Eddowes murder, which occurred within the City of London, the City Police under Detective Inspector James McWilliam were involved. However, overall direction of the murder inquiries was hampered by the fact that the newly appointed head of the CID, Robert Anderson, was on leave in Switzerland between September 7th and October 6th, during the time Chapman, Stride, and Eddowes were killed. This prompted the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren to appoint Chief Inspector Donald Swanson to coordinate the inquiry from Scotland Yard. Partly because of the dissatisfaction with the police effort, a group of volunteer citizens in London's East End, called the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, patrolled the streets looking for suspicious characters, petitioned the government to raise reward for information about the killer, and hired private detectives to question witnesses independently. Butchers, slaughterers, and surgeons and physicians were suspected in the manner of the mutilations. A surviving note from Major Henry Smith, acting commissioner of the city police, indicates that the alibis of local butchers and slaughterers were investigated, with the result that they were eliminated from the inquiry. A report from Inspector Donald Swanson to the Home Office confirms that 76 butchers and slaughterers were visited, and that the inquiry encompassed all of their employees for the previous 6 months. Some contemporary figures, including Queen Victoria, thought the pattern of murders indicated that the culprit was a butcher or cattle drover on one of the cattle boats that piled between London and the mainland Europe. Whitechapel was close to the London docks, and usually such boats docked on Thursday or Friday departed on Saturday or Sunday. The cattle boats were examined, but the dates of the murders did not coincide with the single boat's movements, and the transfer of crewmen between boats was also ruled out. Criminal profiling. At the end of October, Robert Anderson asked police surgeon Thomas Bond to give his opinion on the extent of the murderer's surgical skill and knowledge. The opinion offered by Bond on the character of the Whitechapel murderer is the earliest surviving offender profile. Bond's assessment was based on his own examination of most of the extensively mutilated victims and post-mortem notes from the previous 4 canonical murders. He wrote, "All 5 murders, no doubt, were committed by the same hand. In the first 4, throats appeared to have been cut from left to right. In the last case, owing to the extensive mutilation, it is possible to say in which direction the fatal cut was made. But arterial blood was found on the wall in the splashes close to where the woman's head must have been lying. All circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been lying down when murdered, and in every case the throat was first cut." Bond was strongly opposed to the idea that the murderer possessed any kind of scientific or anatomical knowledge, or even the technical knowledge of a butcher or a horse slaughterer. In his opinion, the killer must also have been a man of solitary habits, subject to periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania. Bond also stated that the homicidal impulse may have been developed from a revengeful or brooding condition of the mind, or that religious mania may have been the original disease, but I do not think either hypothesis is likely. While there is no evidence of any sexual activity with any of the victims, psychologists suppose that the penetration of the victims with the knife and leaving them on display in sexually degrading positions with the wounds exposed indicates that the perpetrator derived sexual pleasure from the attacks. This view is challenged by others who dismiss such hypothesis as insupportable supposition. Legacy. The nature of the murders and of the victims drew attention from the poor living conditions in the East End to the galvanized public opinion against the overcrowded, unsanitary slums. In the 2 decades after the murders, the worst of the slums were cleared and demolished, but the streets and some buildings survived, and the legend of the Ripper is still promoted by guiding tours of murder sites. The 10 Bells public house on Commercial Street was frequented by at least one victim and was the focus of such tours for many years. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, and later Jack the Ripper became a child's boogeyman, depictions were often phantasmic or monstrous in the 1920s and 1930s. He was depicted in films dressed as everyday clothes as a man with a hidden secret, preying on the unsuspecting victims. Atmosphere and evil were suggested through lighting effects and shadow play. By the 1960s, the Ripper had become the symbol of predatory aristocracy and was portrayed in a top hat dressed as a gentleman. The establishment as a whole became the villain, with the Ripper acting as a manifestation of upper-class exploitation. The image of the Ripper merged with or borrowed symbols from horror stories such as Dracula's Cloak or Victor Frankenstein's Organ Harvest. The fictional world of the Ripper confused with multiple genres ranging from Sherlock Holmes to Japanese erotic horror. In addition to the contradictions of unreliability of contemporary accounts, and attempts to identify the real killer are hampered by the lack of surviving forensic evidence, DNA analysis is inconclusive. The available material has been handled many times and is too contaminated to provide meaningful results. Jack the Ripper features in hundreds of works of fiction and works to straddle the boundaries between both fact and fiction, including the Ripper Letters and a hoax diary of Jack the Ripper. The Ripper appears in novels, short stories, poems, comic books, games, songs, plays, operas, and television programs and films. To date, more than 100 nonfiction works deal exclusively with Jack the Ripper murders, making it one of the most well-written true crime subjects. The term Ripperology was coined by Colin Wilson in the 1970s to describe the study of the case by professionals and amateurs. The periodicals Ripperania, Ripperologist, and Ripper Notes published their research. Unlike murderers of lesser fame, there is no waxwork figure of Jack the Ripper at Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors, in accordance with their policy of not modeling persons whose likeness is unknown. He is instead depicted as a shadow. In 2006, Jack the Ripper was selected by BBC History magazine and its readers as the worst Briton in history. So that is Jack the Ripper. I mean, 5 canonical murders, just shredding people apart. I've always kind of liked the idea. I liked what From Hell, suggested, that it was a person of noble blood that was going out and killing them and whatnot. It's just, we'll never know the truth of what happened to those 5 women, who killed them. If it was killed by the same guy, you have to have some kind of knowledge of the human body to remove a uterus. You can't just go in there and have it be a plaything. You're looking for, it's the 1880s, 1890s. The average person won't know what a uterus is or what it looks like. Hell, the average person today won't know what a uterus is or what it looks like. So I feel personally, my thoughts, and these are mine, are that with Jack the Ripper, it was someone who knew at least some workings of the human body, had some study of the anatomy, and kind of understood what it was doing. So I don't know. It's definitely an interesting tale. But what are your thoughts? Let us know about your thoughts of Jack the Ripper. Do you think that the 5 are just him, or do you think that the other 2 come into play? Do you think that there's more? Let us know on Twitter at kzomradio, or on Facebook, facebook.com/kzomradio. This will be up on our website, kzomradio.com, which you can leave comments on our discuss board, which would be great. And we'll see you guys next week for Know Your Legends, Unsolved Murders. I'm Matt Jarbo. Have a great day.